Endurance is not simply about how long you can push before you collapse. It's not solely defined by the capacity to run farther, lift heavier, or tolerate more. At its core, endurance is about control over the mind, the body, and the interface between them. It is a trainable capacity rooted in the brain and expressed through the body. And like anything trainable, it requires deliberate effort, repeated exposure to challenge, and a deep understanding of the physiological and psychological mechanisms that support it. To build endurance, you must first understand what it is on a neurological and physiological level. Endurance is not just about muscles or lungs, it's about the integration of systems. The cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, the muscular system, and perhaps most critically, the nervous system. All of these must be aligned and trained systematically. It begins with how the brain perceives effort, because the perception of fatigue often precedes the actual physical limitations. If you can understand how your brain signals effort and how to modulate that signal, you gain a tremendous advantage in building lasting endurance. One of the first tools you need to cultivate is interoceptive awareness. This is your brain's ability to detect internal signals. Your heart rate, your breathing, the acid levels in your muscles, your core temperature. These are not just sensations, they are data points your brain uses to regulate your performance. Most people ignore or misinterpret them. The elite performers, the ones with incredible endurance, listen to them with precision and respond accordingly. They don't panic when heart rate increases. They interpret that signal as part of the process. They don't stop when their muscles begin to burn. They recalibrate their breathing, their cadence, their mindset, and they keep going. Breathwork is one of the most powerful tools for endurance. It's not just about oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. It's about shifting the state of your nervous system. Nasal breathing, for instance, supports parasympathetic activity and improves CO2 tolerance. When you train to breathe through your nose under stress, you are not just building physical capacity. You are retraining your brain's relationship to stress. You're telling it, "This is manageable. I've got this." When the brain believes that, it attenuates the signal of effort. That's endurance. Start by incorporating nasal breathing into low to moderate intensity activity. Over time, push that boundary. Teach your body that it can perform and even thrive under conditions that once felt limiting. Cold exposure is another powerful mechanism. When done correctly, it trains your mind and body to dissociate from the immediate impulse to escape discomfort. The discomfort of cold is not dangerous in controlled environments, but your brain interprets it as a threat. When you override that instinct consciously, you create neural adaptations that generalize to other forms of stress. You begin to develop a new threshold for discomfort. This threshold translates into running when your legs are heavy, climbing when your lungs are burning, thinking clearly when your body wants to shut down. That's what building endurance really means, adapting to stress without breaking. Let's talk about the brain's default response to fatigue. As effort increases, there's an automatic shift in your neural activity. Specifically, the prefrontal cortex begins to lose dominance, and the brainstem takes over. This is a survival mechanism, but in endurance work, that transition has to be managed. You need the prefrontal cortex online to maintain strategy, to regulate pacing, to maintain motivation. One way to support this is through deliberate self-talk. Not abstract affirmation, but concrete cues. Telling yourself, relax the shoulders, steady the breath, eyes forward, engages top-down processing. It keeps the higher-order centers engaged and helps you override the primitive impulse to stop. This is not just psychological. It is a physiological modulation of brain state. Self-directed thought keeps the prefrontal cortex engaged, and that keeps endurance alive. There's another principle that's crucial: progressive overload. Not just in terms of physical training, but in terms of stress exposure. You build endurance by exposing yourself to incrementally higher loads of discomfort, stress, or demand. This applies to interval training, to long-duration aerobic work, even to cognitive endurance. If you're not progressively increasing the duration, the intensity, or the complexity of your effort, you're not building endurance. You're just repeating a familiar pattern. The body doesn't adapt to what it already knows. It adapts to what challenges it. This means planning your sessions with increasing difficulty, slight increases, not heroic leaps. Consistent, manageable progression. That's the formula that works at the level of biology. Nutrition and hydration play a central role, but not just calories in, calories out. It's about fuel availability. Endurance work depletes glycogen, so you need to ensure adequate carbohydrate intake before and after. But fat adaptation is also important. Training in a fasted state occasionally teaches the body to utilize fat more efficiently, which is critical for longer durations. Electrolytes, especially sodium, potassium, and magnesium, support muscular contraction and nerve signaling. Ignore them and you'll feel it, not just in cramps, but in the declining ability to persist. Every system needs support, and your nutritional approach needs to reflect that. Sleep is another pillar. Endurance training stresses the body, and adaptation only happens during recovery. Specifically, during deep sleep, there are hormonal cascades: growth hormone release, muscle repair, neural recalibration, that build your endurance capacity over time. If sleep is compromised, none of the training matters. You'll plateau, or worse, you'll regress. You must treat sleep like a training session, non-negotiable, protected, and optimized. Consistent timing, dark room, cool temperature, low stimulation before bed. This isn't soft science. This is the foundation of every physiological adaptation you're trying to create. There's also something to be said about visual anchoring during moments of fatigue. When you're pushing your threshold, where your eyes go matters. Looking at a fixed point in the distance, rather than scanning your environment, stabilizes your vestibular system and reduces sensory load. This translates into a calmer brain state, reduced cognitive fatigue, and prolonged physical output. It's a subtle shift, but endurance is built on subtleties stacked over time. Focused gaze equals focused mind, and a focused mind is what drives endurance far beyond the physical limitations. Now, when it comes to motivation, it's important to understand dopamine's role. Dopamine is not just the reward chemical, it's the molecule of pursuit. When you anticipate a reward, dopamine rises. When you achieve the reward, it drops. If your training is always about the outcome, your dopamine will spike early and drop off. That's not sustainable. But if you train yourself to attach dopamine to the process, to the act of training, to the grind itself, you create a feedback loop that reinforces endurance. You learn to crave the work, not the result. That's how you sustain a long-term trajectory of growth, and that's how the most enduring athletes, creators, and thinkers operate. They derive reward from the process itself. Another lever to pull is heat training. Training in elevated temperatures forces the body to improve plasma volume, thermoregulation, and cardiovascular efficiency. It teaches the brain to tolerate additional physiological stress without panicking. Saunas after workouts or controlled exposure to hot environments can amplify endurance adaptations. It's not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's about intelligent exposure to controlled discomfort. The body responds to repeated stressors by becoming more resilient. The key is consistency and calibration, not maximal stress, optimal stress. Let's also talk about mindset. Endurance requires a mindset that accepts the inevitability of discomfort without being defined by it. The narrative you construct in your head during those moments matters. Do you see fatigue as a signal to stop, or as a sign that you're entering the zone where growth happens? Do you interpret pain as a threat or as data? The framing determines the outcome. Mental endurance is not born in a vacuum. It's built by training your cognitive response to adversity. You can use journaling, visualization, and mental rehearsal to train this response just as you would train a physical skill. The nervous system doesn't know the difference between a vividly imagined scenario and a real one. If you can rehearse pushing through fatigue in your mind, you're laying the neural groundwork for doing it in real time. Community is another often overlooked factor. Training in solitude builds discipline, but training with others builds reinforcement. There's a social component to endurance that activates different neural circuits. Mirror neurons, shared effort, mutual accountability, they all contribute to an elevated threshold. You see someone push, and your brain says, I can go too. You share struggle, and the burden gets lighter. Find a tribe, a group, a partner who shares the mission, not just for accountability, but for mutual elevation. Endurance is contagious when shared. Let's not ignore the importance of variability. The body adapts to specific patterns. If you always run the same route at the same pace, under the same conditions, your progress will stall. Introducing variability, terrain, intensity, duration, environment, keeps the nervous system alert and responsive. It keeps adaptation alive. Cross-training is not a compromise, it's a catalyst. Cycling, swimming, hiking, rowing. They all challenge endurance in different ways, and those adaptations feed into one another. Think of your training like a symphony, different instruments working together to produce a stronger, more robust output. And finally, the most essential truth, endurance is identity. It's not something you do. It's something you become. Each time you choose to continue when it would be easier to stop, you rewrite your identity. Each moment of persistence creates a neural signature. I am someone who endures. That identity becomes embedded, and over time it changes your baseline. What once seemed hard becomes normal. What once seemed impossible becomes your starting point. This is not just physiology. It is neuroplasticity, and you control it. You don't have to be born with endurance. You build it, you train it, you reinforce it through deliberate, consistent action. It is the byproduct of physical effort, mental resilience, emotional control, and biological optimization. And the most extraordinary thing is this. The longer you commit to building it, the more it builds you in return. Endurance is a trainable neural skill. Not just physical capacity, true endurance is built by training the nervous system to tolerate and reinterpret stress, fatigue, and discomfort. Not just by increasing physical strength or stamina. The mind is the governor of fatigue, and breath, focus, and self-talk are your tools. Your perception of effort is regulated by the brain, and with proper breath control, visual anchoring, and deliberate cognitive cues, you can override the impulse to stop and go farther than you believe possible. Controlled exposure to stress builds adaptation across all systems, whether it's cold, heat, fasted training, or variable terrain. Intentionally placing the body and mind under stress, consistently and progressively, forces adaptation, resilience, and the identity of a person who endures. Endurance begins not in the legs or lungs but in the brain. It's a neurobiological process that can be shaped just like muscle can. The misconception is that some people are simply built for endurance while others aren't. In reality, endurance is constructed through repeated engagement with discomfort, with the brain adapting to those stimuli over time. Neural circuits responsible for motivation, effort regulation, and stress response become more efficient through intentional exposure to physical and mental strain. You are not just toughening the body, you are rewiring your nervous system to respond to difficulty with clarity and control. Each session of training sends signals to your brain that reframe effort not as a danger, but as a normal and manageable condition. You build interoceptive awareness, the skill of reading your internal state, and you begin to master the interface between stress and performance. The more you engage with discomfort intentionally, the more your brain learns to lower the perception of threat. This reshapes how long you can last, how deep you can push, and how well you perform under prolonged challenge. Endurance, then, becomes less about genetics and more about how deliberately you've trained your mind, body system to stay in the fight. The mind is not just part of endurance. It governs it. The perception of fatigue often arrives long before the body has reached its true limits. What you think, see, and say to yourself directly influences how your nervous system interprets effort. Breathwork plays a central role here. Nasal breathing, for example, slows heart rate, increases carbon dioxide tolerance, and reduces panic signals from the brainstem. This allows the higher-order centers of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, to remain in control, directing focus and intention rather than reacting reflexively. Visual anchoring also reduces cognitive load and stabilizes brain function by aligning your eyes with a fixed point, allowing your motor system to run with less interference. Deliberate self-talk, short, action-oriented cues like steady the pace, breathe low, push through, activates goal-oriented neural pathways and keeps your brain engaged with the task, not the discomfort. These tools are not theoretical, they are performance levers. Athletes and special operators use them because they work. If you can control your breath, your gaze, and your thoughts during peak fatigue, you can prolong your effort significantly. The nervous system, when regulated correctly, becomes a source of fuel, not friction. Adaptation is your body's natural response to consistent, progressive stress. But it has to be the right kind of stress, delivered in the right amounts. Endurance grows when you challenge your systems just beyond their current capacity, then allow recovery. This includes cold exposure, heat training, and fasted workouts, all controlled environments where your system is pushed to recalibrate. In the cold, your brain learns to stay calm despite alarm signals from the body. In the heat, your plasma volume expands and thermoregulation improves. In a fasted state, your metabolism learns to access stored energy more efficiently. All of these stimuli communicate one thing to your system: get stronger or get left behind. And the system responds. Electrolyte balance, sleep quality, and nutritional strategy also feed into this loop, acting as inputs that determine the quality of your adaptation. There's a cumulative effect. Every controlled stressor adds up. Each one teaches your body and brain to respond, not retreat. And that shift, responding instead of retreating, marks the evolution from someone who struggles with fatigue to someone who thrives in its presence. When you willingly engage with discomfort, your biology doesn't just survive, it adapts, strengthens, and endures. Endurance is not granted, it's forged. Through deliberate training of the mind, body, and nervous system, you create a new baseline for what you're capable of. Every breath you control under stress, every repetition you push through discomfort, every moment you override the impulse to quit, those are not just actions, they are signals to your system that you are becoming more. Over time, the very conditions that once broke you become the ones you thrive in, and in that space, where effort meets control, you don't just build endurance, you build identity.